Hi, today's presentation is about cultural dominance. The dominant culture in a society refers to the established language, religion or beliefs, values, rituals, and social customs. These traits are often the norm for the society as a whole. Culture is a complex system of meaning and behavior that defines the way of life for a society. It also includes knowledge, art, morals, laws, habits, and dress. Before the 1500s, China and maybe the Middle East were the dominant powers in the world. For the past 200 years, the world's economic, political, and cultural center of gravity has been firmly rooted in the West. Dominant Western culture spread to most of the world through colonization and market dominance. As Western civilizations colonized lands, they brought their traditional knowledge of science, medicine, and education.
From clothes to coffee to food and movies, Western culture is big and getting bigger in China. KFC is the country's most popular restaurant chain. A Buick is the top-selling car. At a public square in Beijing, 35-year-old Ho Xiaozhou and friends show off moves they learned from watching their American idols on the internet.
The West influences us a great deal. For example, those of us who skateboard now are all learning from the West, from America. We watch how their professional skateboarders practice and imitate their methods. The way they dress influences how we dress. We imitate how they skateboard. Watching them inspires us to think about how skateboarding should be.
Western culture swept into China when the country opened to foreign trade 30 years ago. Western brands and ideas have exploded in the past decade as economic boom expanded the country's middle class. Now the government is pushing back. President Hu Jintao says China's culture is being infiltrated by hostile Western forces, and the government has set new limits on Chinese mass media. First, they issued edicts that killed some racy and wildly popular TV shows and pushed others out of prime time. Xu Fan is a professor at the Communications University of China, the country's top training ground for budding TV journalists and hosts.
The rules are meant to restrict two types of programs. The first is crime programs that show audiences how crimes are committed, how to steal and rob, criminal techniques, and scenes of the crime. This is what ordinary people like to watch, but these types of programs are against law and order. Second are dramas with contents of immorality, moral and ethical betrayals.
This generation of Chinese wants a voice. Freedom is what Ho, the skater, talks about when asked what he likes about Western culture.
It attracts and interests me a great deal. I think it's very free, and that really attracts me. Their thoughts are very open-minded and positive.
The government may find it very difficult to change his mind.
How and why the West is the dominant culture? The United States contains only 4% of the world's population, but it accounts for nearly 25% of global economic output. The combined effects of being one of the richest countries in the world and one of the largest in terms of population puts the U.S. market in a dominant position. Only the European Union now exceeds the U.S. market in size and wealth. How and why? The EU achieved unity of currency in 2002. Currently, the euro has been adopted by 17 member states of the European Union and is shared by 500 million citizens, making it one of the world's most important currencies and, of course, one of the EU's greatest achievements. European civilizations competed with one another to dominate most of the land, and today they colonized much of the world. Economies today are based on competition. Our science today is also based on competition. Each nation wants to be the first to go to space, the first to create a robot, or the first to come up with medical aid, and so on. But where did this Western culture begin? It began in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Western culture continued to develop with Christianization during the Middle Ages, the reform and modernization then triggered by the Renaissance, and with globalization by successive European empires that spread European ways of life and European educational methods around the world between the 16th and 20th centuries. Even something like rational thinking developed through a long age of change and formation. with experiments of the Enlightenment and breakthroughs in the sciences that spread to the rest of the world. Western culture has a strong emphasis and focus on innovation and invention through science and technology. They have the ability to generate new materials and processes. Sports? The Olympics? Where do you think that came from? A wide range of sports was already established in ancient Greece. Military culture and sports influenced each other. It became such a prominent part of culture that they created the Olympic Games. The mainstream Western media continues to be perceived as a fair, independent, and objective medium of news reporting. The roots of the Western media can be traced back to the late 15th century, when printing presses began to operate throughout Western Europe. When we walk by a building and look at the architecture, we always relate it to another structure or building we may have seen in another country. Why do you think that is? Important Western architectural motifs include the Doric, Corinthian, and Ionic columns, and the Romanesque, Gothic, Baroque, and Victorian styles are still widely recognized and used even today in the West and the rest of the world. But it doesn't stop there. It isn't just about the old school columns built in Europe, but also the skyscrapers. The skyscraper is a modern universal architectural form that was first developed in New York, London, and Chicago. Dance. Ballet and ballroom dance are distinctively Western and important dance forms. The West is also famous for their folk dance, such as the polka, the square dance, and the Irish step dance. Soap operas. When you think of soap operas, you may think of a Spanish soap opera or Turkish soap operas that your parents may watch. But the soap opera originated in the United States on radio in the 1930s and then a couple decades later on television. Alongside soap operas, in the middle of the 20th century, the West developed the music video. Literary works such as Homer's Iliad, which is much older, occurred worldwide. But the form of storytelling, with developed, consistent human characters and a connected overall plot, was popularized by the West. And of course, today's bestsellers and popular books are generally novels. It is predicted that times are changing. We have nations like China and India expanding their global economy, and the power of cultural dominance is passing eastwards. It is said that by the end of the century, Eastern social development is predicted to put an end to the reign of Western dominance. The future cannot be told. The only certainty we know is that the course of history is constantly being updated. Even writings in the stone begin to fade eventually. Nations, or even people, have to constantly adapt and upgrade to stay on top. Like fashion, like a bad week, or a permanent marker. Nothing is forever. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.